Hi there, I'm Melody Brooke, licensed professional counselor and marriage and family therapist, and this is Melody's World. I started this weekly, whatever this is, talk, and I did that because I realized there's just so much happening in the world that is difficult for us to swallow. And there's so much change that's needed to happen that it's gotten to the point that it seems like everything is turning upside down. And so I'm really concerned with the way that people are looking at things and attacking each other and seeing these the things that are happening in the world as being good guys against bad guys, and just looking at each other as enemies rather than considering that we're all trying to do the best we can. Today I was on one of my Facebook pages as a group that talks about therapy, and one of the people in the group posted this thing about marriage, suggesting that marriage laws should change. And there's no question that our system is very broken. I don't think anybody would disagree with that because it's been so adversarial for so long, and it's caused people to lose fortunes, lose relationships, lose custody, alienate from their children, all kinds of really terrible things. And it's ridiculous because we all love each other. We may not love the partner that we're separating from, but we love our children. And just because we don't love them doesn't mean we have to hate them. But the interesting thing to me was what was suggested on this page was that we should do away with no-fault divorce. That was one of the suggestions. Do away with the child support altogether and have it mandatory 50-50 splitting of custody with the kids. And what was the other? Mandatory paternity tests and mandatory, okay. Telling me that there are some hand gestures that I could use, but I'll figure that out at another time. And what I responded to with that was, wow, people being forced to stay in marriages where they're unhappy. I don't care if you're a man or a woman, it's not a good thing. If you're unhappy, if you don't want to be in this marriage. Now, I do think it's probably a good idea that before getting divorced, they may be important for them to have a consultation with a therapist and to discuss what's really happening here so that everybody comes to an agreement about it, and it's not just one person dumping it on another, for example. Sometimes that may not be necessary in cases of abuse and infidelity, maybe even, but even infidelity is something that I've often worked through with my clients who have that come up in their marriages, and work it through and resolve it and actually end up having a better relationship afterwards. But the no-fault divorce thing is like, oh no, there's a reason why that's in place. Because if we have to have a drastic reason for it, then there's going to be a lot of false accusations of abuse, of infidelity, and just all kinds of things that are going to cause more of a problem than not. And I understand the problem with, the 50-50 custody thing is that ideally, yes, if both parents want that role, yeah, do that. And if that's the case, then child support has to be negotiated in a different way. And I think today's way of measuring it is just appalling, because I have known too many men that have literally killed themselves because they couldn't pay their child support. And men who were, just not making enough money to pay the minimum child support, and they were trying really hard. And I knew this kid one time, he was working 80 hours a week and living in a friend's place where he didn't have to pay rent, and he didn't have money to buy a coat, and all of his money went to child support. And he couldn't afford health care, he couldn't afford dental care, but all of his money was sent to child support so that he did not end up in jail. And if he didn't pay it, he would end up in jail. Well, there's something very wrong with the system where that happens. At the same time, there's an awful lot of women whose husbands just walk away from the marriage and have no interest in helping with the kids at all. And without some child support, they would either be stuck in the marriage or in poverty. So it's not a simple solution. It seems like it should be, but it's not, because every case is individual. The problem comes when we have a judge telling us what's in the best interest of our child, when a judge doesn't necessarily know what that is. I certainly wouldn't want a judge telling me what's in the best interest of my child. I don't know about you, but I wonder how much of these laws can and should be changed. And my friend, Sherry Palmer, she's been doing this work with couples and with families for decades, helping them to navigate the legal system when it comes to divorce and moving on and shared parenting. And it can be a very ugly process, but it doesn't have to be. I think most of the time it gets ugly like that when people are not able to really take ownership of their part in what's happening, and they want to blame. If a person is stuck in blame and they just can't see their part in anything. So one of the people in the group, who's a therapist, said, well, it's always one person's fault when there's a divorce. And I thought, man, that's awful that he could say that, because I don't believe that's true. We all have 100% responsibility for our part in any relationship that we're in. And if we get in a relationship where there's abuse happening, we picked that person. And there were probably lots of signs along the way that we ignored. And so that's our responsibility. That's not the other person's fault. They were just being themselves, granted a way that makes it very difficult to stay married to them. But we will have allowed it. We will have not respected ourselves enough to have those kinds of boundaries. And of course, it's into a whole other subject of those of us who are raised to please and placate and take care of somebody else and not have any needs. And that can happen male or female, more often as female. But it's kind of ridiculous. We all have responsibility in how our relationships turn out. And if we can't own that, then we're stuck in a place of victimhood and anger and hurt and just killing ourselves with a negative energy that doesn't help anyone, certainly not our children. And it's hard. I know it's hard because I've done it. I've been in that situation. And, I've had my share of anger that came across at my ex, and it makes sense because personally I was hurt, right? And when we're hurt, we often get angry. But carrying it for a long time, not recognizing our part in it, and just building on that resentment and anger, it's going to be a bad thing for everybody involved. And there's nobody that's going to benefit from that. So telling a person that there's always one person to blame, it's just not the case. It really is not. We weave these relationships together. It's like this. It's not this. It's this. And we've woven that together, and we have to unweave that mess together. And we can do that either as a divorced couple, or we can do it as a married couple. But we have to take ownership of our part equally, because we are both equally responsible 100% for our part and how we respond, and whether or not we can protect our boundaries, and what our agreements are, and what we allow to have happen and what we don't allow. And that's not on the other person. Had people talk about boundaries for quite some time now. There's a John Bradshaw book about boundaries, and talked about how we need to have boundaries in order to be healthy human beings who have a sense of self. And I absolutely agree. The difficulty comes in we have those boundaries, but it's not the other person's responsibility to protect those boundaries. It's our responsibility to do that. We have the job of making sure that those boundaries are respected. If they're not respected, that's fine. We just don't have a relationship with that person. But we have to communicate that so the other person understands what it is that isn't working for us. If we just walk away and say, oh, that crossed my boundaries, well, and the other person has no idea what they did, that's a problem because you're not being respectful of the other person or yourself, really. But it's up to us to recognize what our boundaries are, know what our boundaries are, know what feels right and what doesn't. Pay attention to that, respect it, and protect it. It's not the other person's responsibility, especially if they don't know, if you haven't told them what it is. So we have to slow down and take ownership of our part, or nothing is ever going to work as a divorced couple or as a married couple. It's just any relationship, no relationship can survive that. It's like I was talking to somebody today who was talking about how, we're getting ready to get married, but neither of our parents can be in the same room with each other. And I thought, man, that's clear evidence that somebody's still blaming someone, maybe both, I don't know. But the blame is pointless, and all it does is cause more misery. And kids, the kids need to see their parents being civil to each other, because kids know that they are a part of each of their parents. They're a part, both of you. And if you hating one of them, then you hate, and a kid's unconscious, they feel like you're a hating part of them. And it's important for kids to know that that's not true. I mean, after all, you had babies together. There must have been something you liked about them. So looking at that big picture, I'm curious what things you think need to, common sense wise, change in our marriage and in our divorce laws. One of the things that was suggested was that everybody should have a prenup. And I think that's not a bad idea. And that everybody should have a paternity test. And I just said, well, I just think they should do that when a child is born, period. They do the paternity test because, unless they don't want, and unless they just don't care, right? If they don't care, then they can opt out of it. But if they opt out of it, then they're responsible for that child regardless, right? But those are things that are not currently part of our system and have caused a tremendous amount of pain for people. Gosh, I know people who've paid child support for children for decades that were not their children. And some who didn't care that they weren't their children, they just loved the kids anyway, and they didn't really care. But those ones that didn't know, that's a pretty terrible thing to do to someone. So there are some things that could be drastically improved. And one of them is to have a judge tell you what is in the best interest of your child, when I don't know that another person can know what's in the best interest of your child. But then that's difficult, right? Because you have experts who are paid to judge that, not just judges, but counselors and advocates, and they can be persuaded. They can be persuaded by personality. They can be persuaded by money. They can be persuaded by a lot of different factors. So anytime you get into a divorce situation with kids involved, it's going to be messy unless you can come to an agreement ahead of time, which is maybe why the prenuptial thing seems like a common sense thing to do. Decide ahead of time. Are you going to want 50-50 custody? Are you going to feel like, and if there's 50-50 custody, what happens with the child support? One parent is, the primary breadwinner, and the other one has taken care of the kids their whole life without going to a job. if they have 50-50 custody, well, gosh, that one parent that was home full time, they're not going to be able to make the kind of income that their partner did. And to have 50-50 child support, I'm not sure that would work. But these are all things that are so complex and so heated for people. And that the family court system ends up being just this place where people act out on their anger and their blame, and it's the kids that end up paying the price. They may not even realize it, because a lot of times those kids are alienated, if not deliberately, then unconsciously alienated from one of their parents. I had a client one time whose his whole life he was told his mother was this drug addict and didn't want them, and that she had abandoned them and all this stuff, when in fact none of that was true. And he didn't find out about the truth until after he was grown and his mom was gone. And it just broke his heart to know that. And yet people do these things because they think it's in the best interest of their child, right? So it's not a simple issue. It's not one rule applies to everybody. Each case is its very own, very specific kind of situation. And that's the difficulty with laws, because the laws can't, there's a lot of areas of gray in between in most human beings. It's never that clear cut. The other issue that came up was talking about how, well, most of the time, women care more about their children, and it's women that are the primary caregiver, which maybe a lot of the time that's true, but discussing child support and child custody has less to do with whether you're a man or a woman than it is with how much time you've invested in your children, how much time you have to invest in your children. And some men have more time and some women have more time. We live in a world where women and men both work these days. It's rare to have a family where somebody stays at home with their kids. And that's a whole other difficult situation to resolve, right? So we have to keep in balance that sometimes men stay home with their kids, and sometimes women stay home with their kids, and sometimes one parent spends more time with the kids than the other, and that all has to be negotiated, which is I have a daughter that does mediation, and she doesn't do it in the family court system, but that to me is a brilliant way, if somebody is a really good mediator, to be able to help parents come together and let go of blame and seriously look at what's right for their kids, given what each of them has to give, without blame, without accusations, like, well, maybe, you weren't somebody that I wanted to live with, but we have these children and we need to help them, even if that means, you get to spend more time with them than me because I'm working too much, or vice versa. And figuring out what's right for your family and try to keep it out of the courts as much as possible, because when the courts get involved, all your choices start to get taken away. So I hope that the main takeaway here is, don't leave it up to the courts. Figure out what you need. Have that talk, whether you stay together or you don't, but talk about what you would want for your family and what's right for where you are in your life. And those may have to be renegotiated every couple of years, given on whatever the circumstances are, because some people develop illnesses and, the situations change, work situations change. But we have to get away from this adversarial way of looking at our family legal system, because that's where we get into really doing harm for families and to individuals. We have to start respecting a family, and that even if you're divorced, you're still family. I know that's hard to do when you're hurt and you're angry, but anything else, it's not going to help you. It's not going to help the kids. So that's my fence post talk for today. Again, I'm Melody Brooke. I'm a licensed marriage and family therapist, and I am an author. I'm a speaker. I'm a filmmaker, an actor, a singer, and an artist and a designer. Anyway, yeah, this is one of my designs I'm wearing today. This one is My Body, My Choice. And I have a line of those on my website, Oh Wow Melody Designs, where you can take a look at what I have that tells the truth about where you're at. Anyway, thanks for tuning in, and I will see you next week. I'm here on Mondays at